So I'm really glad you could be on today. You know, you're one of my favorite people to talk to because you're involved in so many different things.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really interesting, some of the stuff you're up to.
Oh.
So I guess before we get into that, you want to just kind of introduce yourself a little bit? Like, yeah, what do you do? Where do you come from?
So my name's Grant. I grew up in Duncan, Oklahoma, born and raised. Family's been there since before Oklahoma was a state.
Really?
Yeah. And then post high school went to Claremont McKenna College, small liberal arts school out in SoCal. Graduated in 4 years, had to handle COVID there, which was a whole mess. And then worked for a year out in Orange County in real estate development. Then decided to come back home to be closer to family, at least for 4 years to get some graduate degrees before I probably go to a coast more full time. So.
Gotcha. So you mentioned Claremont McKenna out there in SoCal. So that's a pretty small school from what I understand.
1,300.
I hadn't even heard of it until I met you. So how'd you find out about that? Why'd you decide to go out there?
Yeah. So I wanted to go Ivy League. Wharton School at UPenn was my number one choice. And I was going to try to use football to get in. I know a lot of people actually do it nowadays, especially with punting and kicking, where it's kind of a ticket into a college of kind of your choice as long as you can be recruited.
Yeah.
So I went to all the Ivy League football camps to try out. And
so were you a punter kicker?
I was a punter kicker instead of a kicker punter, even though they'll put KP. But I was primarily a punter. There was a kid in high school who was a kicker. He was a grade above me. So I didn't do field goals and kickoffs until my senior year. So I started varsity my freshman year of high school punting. So
but you were trying to leverage that for school.
Yeah, so I was leveraging that for school. And so I went to all these camps. None of the Ivies but Yale looked at me. And I didn't want to go to Yale.
Okay.
My brother got recruited by Harvard. He actually turned Harvard down. There's a whole story of that.
Oh, wow. That's kind of a flex.
Yeah, it is kind of a flex. He was committed, I think, at one point, and it was just a bunch of drama that kind of happened on their end. But I toured Yale with him. I didn't like it at all.
What did you like about Yale?
So, for football at least, I would have had to catch a bus to go to practice. And if you missed that bus, then you would be...
It's an off-campus facility?
Yeah, off-campus facility. And I didn't like that at all. And I toured... he graduated when I was in 7th grade. So I was in 6th grade when we toured that, and I remembered that. So they kept on coming and talking to me, wanting to recruit me, and I was just not that interested.
Yeah.
So I was at Brown's camp, and I had been punting fantastic that summer, between junior and senior of high school. I was the best pure punter at UPenn, but they already had their guy. So they had him come there, probably, I think they had him come here. He might have not even been there at the camp. But they already had their guy, so they didn't give me any time of day. No. I go to Brown's camp. Yale had, I think, talked to me at Brown, but some of the camps have like multiple schools, some are just that school. Brown had multiple schools, and us kickers basically got sent off to our own field, and none of the other coaches were looking at us or anything, and they just went on the written report of the guy.
That's not fun.
Yeah. And there was this one kid who was doing kind of the same tour as me, and I actually held the field goal for him to get offered by Brown. So
you're a little bitter about that?
No, I was happy to help him. I liked Brown, but it wasn't my top choice. It was more because a family friend went to Brown.
Oh, okay.
And so he was trying to get me to go to Brown. But,
so you were still primarily interested in like the academics of it?
Yeah, I mean, I did it for the academics. I wanted a high caliber academic school that I wouldn't necessarily get in Oklahoma or the surrounding states. Also the networks are just so much stronger in terms of they're in the coast, they're in the big cities, so there's just a lot more income, probably would be the best way to say. Yeah, more opportunity. So that was part of the reason that I was wanting that too. But at the Brown camp, I ended up talking to a coach from Claremont. It actually has 3 colleges within one athletic department.
Wow.
So instead of it being like Claremont McKenna football, it's actually Claremont Mudd Scripps. It's
I've never heard of that.
Claremont McKenna, Harvey Mudd, and Scripps College are all one athletic department. Because
that's an interesting model.
It's 5 colleges, undergrad colleges, that are loosely underneath, kind of like a university umbrella, but they're all independent colleges in their own right.
So they don't share like a board of regents or anything?
No, they don't share trustees or anything, but they do share like health services, a library, like some of those things. They do have like a 5C campus security, and we have our own for CMC. But there was 3 schools for one athletic department and 2 schools for another, and we were bitter rivals.
Oh, wow.
Greg Popovich said it was the best rivalry he had ever coached. And he coached at Pomona.
Oh, okay.
So our rivals. Yeah. So I go to Brown, punt great. Claremont looks at me as like great, and then the same kid that I had held the ball of Brown, and he and I, like, they invite me, if I was really interested, I had to go to their camp, like, the next week in California. So I was in the Northeast, away from home, and I had been doing...
How long was that?
I was up there for, like, a week and a half, maybe 2. And then came back home, I think, for, like, 2 days or something, and then went out to California. I even went to Stanford's camp, and I would say I was at least on their list. I probably wouldn't have gotten offered.
That's a little more competitive.
Yeah. I was a 4.5-star recruit.
Wow.
So, but I went to Claremont, and they did the.
Well, isn't the star rating a little bit different for kickers?
It's out of 5.
Yeah, I mean it's still out of 5, but I thought the scale for
it depends on how it depends on how you're judged. So, there's 2. If you want to go into the whole like punting and kicking like lore, I guess, of it.
Like, you're not going to find a 3-star kicker.
You will. I mean, that's what they start their rankings at, basically.
That's
where most of them do. That's where I started when I was like a freshman. So there's 2 guys who basically run the recruiting scene for kicking and punting for, I would say, 80% of colleges. Like, go to these guys. It's Chris Saylor and Cole. So Saylor and Cole are like the 2 camps you go to. They do camps all over the country like twice a year. So they go to Dallas like twice a year. You go there, you get seen by him. He and his coaches rank you, that sort of thing. And
so that's a bit of a bottleneck then.
There is a little bit of bottleneck, but there's a lot of punting and kicking. Like the former OU punter Turk, who was really good. Yeah, he was taught by his uncle who played in the NFL, and he didn't go to any of those guys. And he went to OU. So if you're good enough, they'll find you. But this is kind of like the easiest way is to get ranked, and so you can kind of get noticed. So people have like a baseline of like, oh, this guy's pretty good. And I worked with his assistant like basically one of Saylor's assistants called Punt Factory. His name's Aaron, and he tried out for the Patriots, I think. But he works with like Jake Bailey, who played for the Patriots and now I think it's the Dolphins.
I think so.
Or something like that. But Claremont does the worst punting exercise for us to see how good we are that I actually absolutely hate. And so it's like that? So there's some of them, they'd give us like 4 punts, and then we'd be done.
That's it?
Yeah. And it's just like, okay, like, I get you want consistency and stuff, and like we warmed up a little bit beforehand, but I hate those because I like getting into a rhythm, you know, because that's part of the fun of it is just like I would go out to like the field at home, and you know we'd punt 50, 60 balls, and you know you're working on stuff and you're getting into a rhythm.
Yeah, you want to talk consistency. You need more than 4 to measure that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, and so the field at Claremont, so they have this humongous athletic facility that overlooks the football field, and when the sun goes down behind it, the wind like comes starts coming in from the coast, even though it's an hour and a half away. Starts coming in, and so there's usually only a west to east breeze. and I was standing on the 50, and I hit 2 punts in a row out of the back of the end zone.
Mm-hmm. So was this field built east-west? Usually they're north-south.
Yeah, it was east-west.
Oh, wow.
So they're north-south in Oklahoma specifically because of the wind.
Yeah.
Because
I know Oklahoma State has theirs east-west.
Yeah. I mean, if you build it east-west here, then you're in a crosswind almost every game, right?
Yeah. And then the sun's in your eye.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't want that. So, and we always played at noon or 1 p.m. at home. Mm-hmm. So it was always nice, sunny, 70 degrees.
Okay.
Overlooking the mountains. And once it got later into the season, they were snow-capped.
That's really
And it was still 7. It's a beautiful field, even though it's D3 and really small. But anyway, I hit 2 best punts, and then we go into the wind, and I hit like 2 30-yard punts, like nothing spectacular, but the coaches start talking to me, and I basically agree within a week, like basically accept their offer.
Well, that's good. So you were there 4 years?
Yeah, 4 years.
Played all 4?
Yeah, for freshman year, we won our first conference championship in 40 years.
Wow.
And then
40 years?
Yeah, the year after I graduated, they won another one.
Okay.
So our coach has done a really good job of rebuilding the program. When I got there were a lot of the senior class were huge leaders. Mm-hmm. We took it a lot seriously because like traditionally it's D3, right? I don't know if you've seen the movie D3 Football's Finest.
I haven't seen that movie, but I kind of understand.
Yeah, so it just makes fun of D3 football and how they don't care, and the president of the university is like, "Oh, we have a football team." Mm-hmm. It's actually loosely based off of Pomona, our rivals, and was written by a guy who played football at one of our conference schools called Occidental. Obama actually went to Occidental for a year.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so anyway, it's just really funny, but we traditionally had been like D3 students who happened to play football, and it seems like our culture had been changing to where it's like, okay, we're more football players and also D3 students.
So you developed like an identity of that.
Yeah, so like prior it was definitely it was like football was almost like a hobby or like a side thing that you did. It wasn't something you really focused on, and by the time I got there it was like, no, we actually focus on this too. So along with our academics, and I would say that because of that,
that's a really important piece of that
so
puzzle.
Like one of the things is my class had like, I don't know, there might have been a few of us that had there were like 10 of us or 15 of us that started in the class, and like 13 of us or 10 of us because of COVID that graduated that year.
Okay.
And only like 3 or 4 of us had jobs post-grad. Whereas the senior class that graduated the year before we got there, all of them had jobs. And so that's kind of the difference, I would say, in mentality, is that my class definitely put a lot more emphasis on football for the most part. So it's we didn't focus as much as on the job search, which all the others did. And Claremont is a real pre-professional school. So for the most part,
very practical.
Yeah, it's very practical education. So even you're getting a liberal arts degree, but I mean, half of us have economics in our major, and that's kind of our practical degree. And then half of us that do that, I mean, we're all kind of dual degrees or double degrees, so we're all doing something else too. But I would say,
so what was it that you did?
I did economics and classical studies.
Okay.
So I did
classical studies.
Yeah.
What made you pick that out?
Well, it started, I mean, I think a lot of...
That was one of the things I was surprised to learn about you, too.
It was classics?
When we first met, it was like, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting. You don't hear that a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, it would be the equivalent of OU's letters majors. And so I always said it's very similar to the education that a founding father of the United States would have. So you're learning ancient Greek, ancient Rome. Maybe not. We didn't learn much about the Enlightenment. I mean, we stopped probably around 400 to 1400 AD. I mean, that's late antiquity.
So when did you start?
In terms
as far as like time period looking at.
I mean, the first written work, the Epic of Gilgamesh.
So, like way back then.
Yeah. Wow. So Gilgamesh, we started with that. But that's the thing with Claremont. It's more of our culture of our school and our extracurriculars, not necessarily our degrees that push us to get jobs. Because I have so many friends that were history majors, and a lot of times you think of history majors probably in the bigger universities, and I mean, history is actually one of the largest CEO majors for like major CEOs in the country, but I mean, all of them had like really good jobs post grad, and most of it. And the joke with Claremont is, you go in wanting to be a medical doctor, like get a biology degree, and then go to med school, but you exit Claremont as a management consultant.
Oh,
like a lot of us.
Is that what you wanted to do?
No.
No.
I wrote it in our midterm that was due yesterday for Bruno, but he asked us about consulting, and I specifically said. For
context to those of you listening to what he just said, we're both in the OU MBA program.
Oh, yeah.
So, continue. Sorry.
Anyway, but I specifically said I have an aversion to consultants because of the asymmetry of risk.
Can you explain that?
So, I don't know if you've read much Nassim Taleb, Skin in the Game, Anti-Fragile, Fooled by Randomness.
I've actually got Anti-Fragile in my backpack over there.
Nice.
Yes.
Love the math. Black Swan's what he's known for, but he kind of talks about Skin in the Game being more about asymmetry of risk, and makes a moral case for it. So basically, the idea is a consultant comes into a company, gives you all these advice and what to do and what the best practices are, and then basically leaves and doesn't have to actually feel the pain or the consequences of what happens from their decisions.
Yeah, gets to just kind of wave a wand.
Yeah, and so I would actually make fun of my friends who were going to like big 3 consulting firms that they were doing that. And not to say you don't learn a lot there, but
you definitely do.
And you
meet a lot of people.
You meet a lot of people. You learn a lot of things, but I don't like the asymmetry of risk that just comes inherently with being a consultant, because you're not actually going to you're not really taking the risk.
There's no accountability there.
Yeah, that the business person, like the owners, are taking. So that's why I made fun of them. But yeah, so classical studies. I mainly focused on Greek honor culture. Because the Greek professor at Pomona, that's what he studied, and I found that absolutely fascinating, especially growing up in an honor culture and southern.
So how'd you find the Greek honor culture? Like, what was the first thing that got you interested in that?
So I wanted to study classics, particularly. Well, it all started because I was really interested in Greek culture anyway. I think that stems from reading Percy Jackson growing up. I mean, a lot of people
will say that. Yeah.
But studying classics or even ancient Greece, you may have one class about myths. And the one class I had, which was my first class, was absolutely fascinating, I thought, because it was called Ancient Heroes and Heroines. And the idea was, from the people that the ancient cultures venerated and held up with high esteem, like Achilles, Heracles.
Yeah, these legends.
You can find out more about the people, like the culture, from why they venerate them.
Yeah, the stories that they choose to share.
Exactly. So those stories of Achilles being a great warrior, honor above all, Agamemnon wants to steal his prize, the girl that he got, and so you see like the honor culture within that and being a great warrior. So it's like, okay, you can probably get an idea that this was probably important to them. And prior to that, I just really hadn't had any explicit conversations about values with anyone. Like, what values should I hold? Like, I grew up in church, and so I understood what those are, but I didn't necessarily understand.
You hadn't internalized it?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I hadn't internalized it. I hadn't really understood why they're important, or maybe I hadn't asked those questions yet, or hadn't gotten there. So my idea was, well, the ancients definitely had more naturalistic values that at least gave.
And we've lost touch with a lot of that.
Yeah, and I would say we lost touch with a lot of that in the past. So there was definitely some values and virtues to learn from the ancients that we may have lost in modernity. And so that was kind of the reason on going into it, is like, okay, I got classics, and I took a lot of finance classes with master students at my school, or 2 of them. But anyway, for electives. But I took those, and so that was like my practical degree or marketable degree was, okay, I know how to do statistics, econometrics, etc. And then I had classics where it's like...
Well, who was the philosopher that invented double entry accounting?
Oh, that was an Italian guy.
It was an Italian guy?
Yeah.
That's right. I kind of remember that now.
Yeah, that was an Italian guy. I think that was...
I'm making it really obvious right now that this is not something I've studied very extensively.
I think that was an Italian guy in maybe the 800s, maybe working for the Medicis. I wouldn't know that. We had a lot of like medieval classes. I did not take them.
No, there's not a whole lot going on.
Well, yeah. So, I wrote and so we had to write like a thesis to graduate. So a lot of my friends were doing like maybe a single variable regression and writing like 20 pages on like this thing. I wrote a 60-page. I call
60 pages.
I wrote over 60 pages over the year, but
okay.
But I call it philosophizing, like, because it's
philosophizing.
Yeah, like it's like pseudo philosophy.
Okay.
Kind of work where, but basically I was trying.
So what makes it pseudo philosophy? Maybe you're about to say that.
Well, yeah, it's just because like I don't know how true this really is, right? It's like I'm basically giving an opinion and an argument, over something that's pretty abstract.
Okay.
So I wrote it over. So there's a saying that Homer and Hesiod gave the Greeks their gods. Mm-hmm. Homer wrote the Iliad and supposedly the Odyssey. And Hesiod wrote this book called Works and Days, which is just as old as the Iliad, at least written form. Mm-hmm. And so there's a bunch of things that go into Hesiod, but I loved Hesiod's thing because when we read it in class, whenever I was in like my first classics class, one thing that really like gripped me is these ancient people seem a lot like how I grew up in rural Oklahoma.
I was going to ask you about that. A little while ago, you mentioned that you hadn't really talked about your values or anything. It sounds like we're kind of coming back to that point. So ask that. In what ways were they?
Yeah, so, I mean, just like going back to Hesiod's Works and Days, like one of the things he tells the letter or the story or the person who's reading it is, okay, the farmer next door has more, like, is richer than you. Well, if you want to be as rich as him or richer, then work upon work. Mm-hmm. It's literally what it tells them is like, okay, you want a better life, then go and work for it. Yeah. And it's like, that's such a, I don't know, southern United States.
Yeah, that's a very Western idea.
Midwestern, a very Western idea is, okay, yeah, like you can pick yourself up by the bootstraps to an extent, and you can go and make a better life for yourself, for your family, that sort of thing. I'm like, that's literally something that, it's like, implicitly, but is definitely something I grew up around.
Yeah, for sure.
But I hadn't really had like material to read about it. I read a lot growing up, so it's like I wasn't reading about that stuff, and it wasn't like I was having explicit conversations about that with people.
Mm-hmm. And that's something you did? You actually had like face-to-face?
Once I started it, like once I was in college and actually reading these, and I was like, oh hey, like when I was at home or with my parents or with my old friends, that sort of thing, I would actually like bring it up and be like, oh, this is like actually fascinating. It's like it seems like we're a lot like the ancient Greeks, especially this work. So that story really gripped me as one of my favorites. But
were there any other ways that struck you as how similar we are?
I mean, the honor culture thing was interesting. I had a conversation with a friend actually a few weeks ago about that, and the American South's honor culture is different than probably the Greece one. America's is more passive-aggressive.
Really?
Yeah, so a lot more, it'll be gossip that kind of gets itself around and how you fight back, being passive-aggressive, that sort of thing, especially in the Deep South. Yeah. Whereas Oklahoma is more south of Tangent. Mm-hmm. But so whereas I would say Greece, it's more like I'm just going to kill you.
Okay, very confrontational.
Yeah, very confrontational. Whereas I would say, I mean, you definitely get that in some like males in the South is a lot more confrontational, but And but a lot of times it can be more passive aggressive in the South, which that was interesting to hear from him talking about it. And he took his honor class here at OU.
Isn't that part of what like the Sermon on the Mount covers? Of like, you say don't murder, I say don't be angry.
So like the turn the other cheek thing.
Yeah.
I've actually heard an argument saying that was actually a repudiation of honor culture, because one of the problems with honor culture, and you can see this in inner cities, because they have big honor cultures, and like in Chicago, is you if like you do something to me, I have to do something to you to save face, and then it basically is an escalating cycle until there's an all-out
it never ends.
Turf war, basically,
dead.
Till they're all dead. Because so like there was one of the big things with honor cultures, and you see this a lot with in the Middle East, because they have a big honor culture, is hospitality, and that's one bit like one of the similarities I would say is like in the South, and I grew up this way, is like like if someone needs something, then you're going to be hospitable to them. Like if they ask for something and it's not that much of a burden, you're gonna do it for them. And it was a lot more enshrined in their cultures, I would say as like, oh, this is like specifically about honor. Whereas here, I mean, you just hear about Southern hospitality, but it's very similar. Kind of why it happens is about like kind of like saving face and showing a good side of yourself, and that's part of the reason why a lot of people leave probably like Southern churches and like Southern culture, because it's like you have to put on like that outside face, and it has to be somewhat perfect.
That's the biggest criticism of religion in this country, I think.
Yeah,
and that you have to act like you are a perfect person.
Yeah, and that stems probably, and I would say that a lot of that probably stems from, especially in the South, where that's a lot more religious, from the honor culture that they live in, because you have to be portrayed as a certain way to signal to people that you are that.
Yeah.
Whereas in the coast, that's not, like in the Northeast and West Coast, that's not necessarily the same thing, but that was very similar to the ancient Greeks. One interesting story is like if, like going back to like the escalation, if you had a guest who was leaving your property and they were like one step away from exiting your property line and they got shot and killed, you would have, by honor, you would have to go and fight their assassin.
Wow.
Yeah. So, because they were still your guests, technically. And if someone gets hurt as your guest, then
you're liable.
Then you're liable because your
That's crazy.
To break your hospitality, yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's a kind of a fun story. There's a number of books that
But isn't that interesting that there are so many things that, you know, when you actually talk about it, it sounds pretty illogical, because it honestly kind of is.
Yeah.
But we all just sort of go along with it.
Yeah.
So did you get into maybe why that is or anything like that in your studies? Like why is this something that we all go along with?
Well, that's one of the interesting things I think with studying the ancients is like, and with that, like, I guess thesis saying, oh, these are values that you know, maybe have been lost or not explicitly stated that I want in my life, and I think part of it is a kind of survivorship bias. It's like, okay, if you do these things, then we know we will survive.
So it's very naturalistic in that way?
I wouldn't say that's survivorship bias. So it's more like, okay,
it's like it has
kind
some
of tribalist.
Sort of utility
There's a utility for it because this helps with survival. And if you read Skin in the Game again, one of the things he talked about is the Lindy effect.
And who wrote that book again?
Nassim Taleb.
Okay.
But one of the things he talks about is the only true like judge in terms of our mortal world is time. So if something lasts against time and is robust against time, then it probably works. And that's one of the things I think with all like these values and virtues, especially with Western culture, that you see is like, okay, this culture has been around since 400-ish BC, like the ancient Greeks kind of started, and has lasted.
What do we mean by works? Because that's almost a very Darwinian thing to be saying. Like this just was selected by.
Well, I mean that's nature. The kind of thing. Like if it doesn't survive time, and nature is part of that, then arguably it doesn't necessarily work. Because if it doesn't survive against that, then it doesn't help with the survival of you, your family, and your progeny.
So are we saying anything, and I'm just asking for clarification here, are we saying anything about goodness? Or is it just,
what about
does it work?
Goodness.
Because there are plenty of evil things that have lasted a very long time.
Yeah, so, I mean, you could say that with, like, Carthage. I think of Carthage sometimes. Like, they were definitely a big-time civilization against Rome. And they probably had a lot of good things, but we don't necessarily know that much about them relatively to Rome because they were destroyed. And you could make some like, oh, they're probably a worse civilization for that or not, but they probably had some good things.
Yeah.
But their values and virtues, because they weren't able to
survive,
aren't going to be here. And I would say that it's just kind of wouldn't say there's necessarily like a moral argument to it. It's just almost kind of the reality that we see is there's going to be these values and virtues that we hold across time, and if those hold across time and they're still here, then there's probably some sort of truth that's associated with them that leads to surviving. Like doing that action leads to surviving.
I see what you're saying.
If you want to get into some illogical stuff about specifically honor culture, that friend I mentioned, his honor class at OU was specifically about race and like the civil rights movements in the United States, and a lot of the things that modern Americans now probably in the Northeast and West think in terms of honor culture, or not honor culture, in terms of race relations. If you look at them in terms of honor culture, it makes a lot more sense.
I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you kind of went there. How do you see that that's different?
I haven't necessarily studied it. So I don't necessarily know.
Well, ask for your opinion.
Yeah,
what do you
but
think
I mean, you think about it, and it's like, I mean, if you have, with segregation or something, right? It's like having, and having that just as like we know that's not like a good thing,
no,
and it's
not.
A waste of resources. It's not a good thing, but like going into that other person's like space, so to speak, is like, oh, you're encroaching on their like. Right.
That's part of the awkwardness that we create.
Yeah. You're encroaching upon like almost them and like their honor, their values and their honor basically, because you're encroaching like on their property or what have you. So like it's like, okay, why does it matter if they drink from the same water spigot or not? And like to us it doesn't matter. But to them with a really entrenched honor culture, it's like it would be the equivalent of them almost like punching them in the face, just because of like the insult that like there's almost basically like an insult it is because that's theirs.
Oh.
And so like and if you think about it that way, a lot of the illogical stuff, especially from like the whites people during that time, it makes like it's not excusable, but it does make sense on why they would act like that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So, so like that's kind of like
and it gets fuzzy when those systems.
Yeah, so when you have those systems where it's like, okay, you have this almost hierarchical system that they've established, and then America's honor culture is not that hierarchical.
No, it's not.
You go to Asia, like where the MBA school went last, and it's super hierarchical to the point where
it's very suffocating.
Yeah.
Even just being a visitor and looking at it. It's
if
uneasy.
you aren't in the top, there's no way for you necessarily to get to the top. Whereas the honor cultures for the West kind of like that rotation at the top, especially. But like the American South, it was a lot stronger back in like the mid 1900s, I would say. But if you look at it from that lens, it's like, okay, that definitely does, like, it doesn't make sense from a modern perspective. But like, if you look at it, it's like, oh, this governor or something needs to save his honor or the honor of his like people or something like that. Then it's like, okay, like I understand where the logic comes in from now, because it's almost like an emotional response and kind of an interpersonal response. Now, my definition of honor isn't necessarily like that, that I I guess I try to live by.
Can I ask how you would define that, and maybe how that's changed? In you
studying
these things?
So one of the differences between like ancient honor and modern honor, I would say, or at least the way that my professor had portrayed it and the way that I've internalized it, is back then it was a lot more about getting honors. So like being named something, having your name on the building, all
different
that,
trophies.
Yeah, trophies, that sort of thing. So there's honors, and then there's honor, and that was more of like your esteem within the community, and within that hierarchy. So I've come to define it more because we don't necessarily have that strong of a hierarchy as they used to.
You'll find that in a lot of professional circles.
Yeah, law is very hierarchical, med schools, and universities particularly.
Yes.
And that might be just because they're a lot older.
That's a good point.
So, but I see honor as just kind of the overarching defining term for interpersonal relationships. So it's like, okay, your honor toward, so I think in concentric circles, thinking of you, between you and your God, yourself, family, friends, community, strangers, and just like these bigger and bigger circles, and your relationships with them are different, and so there's different kind of things that would be honorable for you to necessarily do between each one. So between you and your family, you would do a lot more probably intimate, like dinners, conversations, than you would necessarily do with a stranger. And that's one of the things that actually Christianity flips on its head.
Yes.
In terms of honor culture, is saying, well, no, you have to bring the stranger. Like you try to bring the stranger into that fold, whereas as honor cultures, like, and that's part of the reason with like the civil rights movement, honor cultures were very much, you have your tribe, and anyone who's not part of that tribe is excluded. I mean, you might trade with them, but they're not part, like, you, and I think there might even be some, like, ancient rules, and they might be talked about in that Skin in the Game book, too, but ancient rules where it's like, oh, well, I mean, you can think about it with usury, in the ancient Jewish tradition. So, you couldn't charge interest to a fellow Jew, I don't think, but you could to non-Jews. And so, like, so that's kind of like that honor culture,
so it's
right?
Tribal.
Yeah, so it's tribal. So it's like you can't charge the people that are within the in group, but you can charge those outside. Maybe some extra interest, that sort of thing. So, I mean,
from what I understand, Christianity was kind of the first way of thinking, if you want to call it that, that didn't subscribe to that.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the big major ones. And it very much turned on its head, kind of all of the Western honor culture.
But did that change anything you thought before going in to this program? You know about honor cultures, or like as far as your personal?
Well, my personal perspective, I've basically spent all of that time. So I guess I started those classes in 2019 until basically the last year. And I would say it's ongoing, but basically trying to combine basically my Christian belief and ethos with kind of like that idea of honor culture. And there's definitely some spots where kind of...
Is there anything you struggled with? If you're willing to talk about that.
Well, I would say it's definitely kind of like... So if the idea of like honor culture is to like esteem yourself within like... is to if a way to like be honorable within your community is to like take on burdens of the community and like help it in some sort of way. And I guess one of the things like with the Christian ethos is like, where do you necessarily draw the line to where you can't help? And I think that's a problem a lot with modern Christianity, at least in the United States, is that it's almost like the entire ethos is compassion without any kind of boundary.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
And so, and I would say that's what I was almost taught growing up, is like, you know, there absolutely...
You're saying you were taught this compassion?
Yeah, at least I think it was implicit. It wasn't like explicitly taught, but at least that's what I at least grew up thinking, is like, okay, there's nothing... Like, I have to give all of myself and have none of myself to other people. And And I do think there's some like there is some like Christianity within that, but there wasn't necessarily God in the picture. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely a root that keeps you at least centered.
Yeah.
But I would say that at least the honor culture, I guess, helped me with that kind of like, I guess,
that you can
ethos that I internalized. The honor culture thing brought it in, and it was like, okay, yeah, well, there's like, you actually like act differently to different groups of people, and that's kind of almost a reality that we actually live, and you actually need to define how you actually define what that looks like. Mm-hmm. And then the Christian ethos comes, and I actually like had to study a lot more about like boundaries and that sort of thing, and being like, okay, like what is like a Christian way to love like a stranger?
A lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah.
Like how do you deal with the guy who's probably a druggie on the side of the road?
Yeah, you know? And so like the West Village here in Oklahoma City is right next to a homeless shelter, and I live in that area. And that's one of the biggest problems my friends say is like, it's not that the jail is 3 blocks away. It's actually there's homeless encampments like kind of all over the place, and it can get kind of dangerous. And so it's kind of like, okay, like you have this, like what do you do about that, I guess, is the question. Like people have been trying to figure that out for the last 100 years. And so like, you know, you see these people, and there's definitely a Christian ethos that's like, oh, we need to be compassionate to them, but then it's like almost like the heart, you know, it's almost like a hardening of heart. It feels like whenever you bring in kind of like the honor with it too. And I would say,
I feel like that's something I haven't heard very many people do a good job of explaining.
Yeah,
it's like, yes, you need to be compassionate to everybody in all this, but, and then say something that's basically the opposite.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think that's how we should be presenting this.
And one of the things with like honor, like especially the honor idea that I've kind of internalized, especially with kind of a Christian ethos, is comparison. So it's kind of like, and you can see it from like an academic standpoint, kind of like a lot more easily, I would say, is like, okay, this is someone from Harvard actually like worth more, so to speak, or higher in the hierarchy, so to speak, than someone who graduates from OU. In Oklahoma, I would say they're probably even.
Yeah.
In New York, I would say Harvard is probably higher. And so there's a little bit of like what communities you're in, or that depends on. But it's, you know, whenever you think of that, whenever I was coming back to OU in terms of for education, I was really wanting to end up at an Ivy League or Stanford for grad, particularly.
Yeah, I'm glad we're coming back to that, because I was going to ask, you know, what brought you.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned family here.
Yeah, but... like, I mean, that was the big driver. My brother was about to get engaged, and I officiated his wedding.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got to.
So are you a minister? Like an ordained
technically,
minister?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when people sneeze, I do the sign of the cross and say bless you. But yeah, so I came back to OU particularly because basically for family. My great-grandfather was the first boy from Duncan to go to OU. Wow. He actually held some sport records for like 20, 30 years. Wow. So, I mean, there's a lot of family tradition at OU. I wanted to be closer to family, at least for a little bit. But, I mean, that's one of the things I struggle with is like, okay, like OU's a good regional school. If you want to be in Oklahoma specifically too, like it's probably the best school you can go to, unless the person hiring you or you're trying to do business with went to OSU. Yeah. But then you just get around that by making fun of each other, right? Like we know how to deal with it. Whereas a lot of my friends are at law schools and MBA programs and graduate programs at top tier universities in the country, that sort of thing, and OU's trying to get there, and it's probably...
It's just not the same
it's just,
echelon of society.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the difference between having a network and...
But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and a lot of it is what you make of it, right? So, like, you go to Harvard or you go to an Ivy League, you have a built-in network specifically in the Northeast, and kind of scattered throughout the country and maybe the West Coast. And that's your network, and they're all definitely probably like pretty successful
pretty
people.
Powerful.
Yeah. So like if you were wanting to, say you went to an Ivy League and you wanted to do business here in Oklahoma, you might have one or two connections from from your time there, or just from the alumni network. You might have a handful of people, or people who know people. But if you went to OU, you would actually know the person that you're trying to do business with. Or you would know like their family member or their best friend somehow. Like the state is basically a small town to an extent. And so like
that credential doesn't carry the same.
Yeah, and I've actually made the argument that and law is very hierarchical. If you want to, very hierarchical from a law school perspective. And I've kind of made the argument.
You're in law school.
Yeah, I am in law school. And I made the argument that if you had a Harvard law degree and an OU law degree and you were coming to Oklahoma to practice, like each degree would probably be equal. And the OU law degree might carry some more weight just because you have more chances to basically get to know who's hiring you. Yeah. And that's how like kind of the name of the game is like that network. So I mean that is so that's one thing where it's kind of like, okay, is this decision like just because of that comparative like honor? And I think and that's the problem with honor cultures in particular, is that you think a lot more about other people's stances, or like I would say orientations toward you, whereas the Christian ethic is, that matters to an extent, but like what really matters is how you're acting toward God. And so there's definitely like some of these,
how that shows itself in how you deal with it.
And so that's definitely something that I basically had to work on, and to make sure like that Christian idea of like God is in the center, and it's more like I'm trying to honor, and I think I've written it down somewhere where it's like, it's more like I'm trying to honor God in my actions, and this is, I think, a framework I can be able to do it, rather than I'm trying to bring honor upon myself.
I see. Yes.
And I would say that's where like the two differentiations between like a pure honor culture type of living versus like if you're trying to, like, the Christian ethos comes in, that sort of thing, and you're trying to still have that kind of framework of like that interpersonal dynamic, that sort of thing.
I see.
But it's really informed kind of a lot of my community involvement, I would say.
What denomination did you grow up in?
Methodist.
Yeah.
So a lot of bad stuff happening in that
denomination.
A lot of
stuff has happened lately.
Yeah, everyone's splitting. My home church that I grew up in actually split. Well, they didn't split from the conference, but they voted 55 to split, and they needed 60% votes. So half the people left. I went back for Easter last year, and there were like 20 of us. And growing up, it's like a 300-person sanctuary, and it was packed on Easter growing up. So, yeah, it's been really bad. And I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, my hometown, I could probably do another whole podcast about Duncan in particular. Growing up, there was
have to do that sometime.
Yeah, there was something evil basically that happened almost every single year to the high schoolers.
What do you mean? If you're comfortable talking about that.
Yeah, so you can even look this up online, and there's even like a crime podcast that have covered him. But there's a kid named Alan Ruby who killed his entire family for money. We all grew up with him. Yeah, so he was kind of like, at one point in high school, he stole his grandma's credit card and went to Paris. And then on the drive to OU, Texas, he came down and wanted his inheritance, basically. So he killed the dog, his sister, who was still in high school.
Why would you kill the dog? The dog has nothing to do with it.
I don't know, man. And his parents went and partied at OU, Texas that weekend, came back. The maid discovered the family that Monday. And then, like, he confessed, like, within the week. And he's at the high security prison in McAllister, the penitentiary in McAllister. The only reason he wasn't put on death row is because he can't write a book about it. That was the deal. He can't, like, profit off of it, even though he's spending life in prison. So I don't know how that would really work.
Yeah.
But my friend and I grew up with have joked, well, that doesn't mean we can't. But, I mean, everyone in my hometown had like basically was somewhat traumatized from that, and like the next year, like the year before or something, there was these 3 kids who killed an Australian national on the side of the road for fun.
Oh.
And then there was a girl who got like, and like, you know, this is a small,
that's not all that cheery.
This is a smallish town, right? I mean, like we all kind of know each other, and we all know what's happening. But basically we had something like, we made national news like 3 years in a row for like high school
something just
murders, that sort of thing. It wasn't 13 Reasons Why bad, but like that book, we all read it. We all read it and saw the show. So, but yeah, it was stuff like that. And so, but like whenever a lot of that stuff was happening, like I saw a post and it's like, we have a church on every corner. And I'm just thinking like, yeah. And it's like, we have a church on every corner because we can't.
A liquor store on every corner.
No, we have like.
At least my hometown.
Oh, really? Yeah. We have like 3 liquor stores. Oh. But it's like they have a church on every corner. I'm like, yeah, you know, you have all of these churches, but I wonder if it's better if you had like 3 or 4 main big churches. That way you actually had more community, like togetherness, because if you have like, if everyone's.
What do you think is the best size?
I don't know about the best size. The church I go to in California is pretty big. It would be considered probably a mega church here.
Really?
It was a spin-off of a mega church. No, I would say it's probably like 500 in the sanctuary with 3 services on Sunday.
3 services. Okay.
Yeah, and the night one is for like college kids and young adults. But I really like that one. But I never really got an idea of like community togetherness from the ones growing up, because that's I think part of the problem is that it was such a given and implicitly given, especially when my like grandmother was growing up in that town, and it's like, and like because of like there's a lot of splintering and fracturing like that, those groups aren't coming together as a community as much, and that's why I'm saying like I want like. Because there's like almost an idea like within Christianity where it's like and I think it's pretty modern, where you don't necessarily need the community of the church. You need, you know, it's just yourself.
Yeah, that is a modern idea.
Yeah, your own relationship between you and God. And that's not what it's about.
I completely agree.
Because it's a lot more about being integrated with the community and living together. And
well, I mean, you go back to the day of Pentecost. That's part of the significance of that, is you're added to this church.
Yeah, you're supposed to be living within this community, and I mean and that's part of what I had a conversation with the president of OU actually a couple weeks ago about an article I wrote on liberal arts.
I was going to bring up that article here.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about how about values and virtues, because that's what I argue in the article, is that there's been some sort of decline in at least our understanding of what the Western values and virtues are, and that, I mean that's what we live, so that's why I'm saying Western, or at least what we in those virtues and or whatever. And so because of this like decadence of it, it's like, okay, well, what is the education system really for? And a liberal arts degree arguably at least puts those in front of you to at least think about. Whether or not you agree with them, whether or not you disagree and think the West is the worst. It just forces
you to think about it.
Yeah, and it seems like, at least growing up, and a lot of this like a lot postmodern Gen Z, always being online, digital, we never, it never got like explicitly told, oh, this is what we're supposed to, these are the values we live by, and it seemed like it was a lot more implicit because of like the communities that they had. But one of the things that the president brought up was like, back 100 years ago, like when my grandmother was growing up, well, that was when she was growing up.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, they had like a church and the courthouse and the town square. Like that was kind of the model. And then he actually brought up that suburbia helped stop that. And like the community kind of fell apart because of suburbia, because it's just a urban, suburban sprawl.
Yeah, you just go sleep here and then.
Yeah, and there's not really like a center place for the community come to. And I would say that Gen Z's basically felt a full frontal like assault against that with the digitalization of a lot of stuff, and because of that we've had a globalization of our values and virtues not every, the honor cultures can be divided up pretty easily: Western, South American, Asian, Middle Eastern, African, and maybe Oceanic. And I would say with that, if you can divide up honor that way, you can definitely divide up like how people think we should live. And whenever you are saying, if you have a globalization of those values, you're
causing those.
Yeah, you're causing those
that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, you're causing confrontations, and because of that, you're not necessarily you're focusing on those like those confrontations instead of actually focusing on the community. So at least from my perspective, it seems like in my hometown, we've got, instead of focusing on Duncan, people are focusing about the world. And it should be like, okay, I would say, like, if you, like, my honor belief would be like, okay, what is something I can do to help my local community? Like, that would be what at least my perspective would say is like, okay, like, there needs to be a good relationship between me and my community that I live in. And what does that look like?
Well, Jordan Peterson talks about that.
Oh, yeah?
A lot. That's one of his big things. It's like you talk about wanting to change the world, and kind of the first thing you have to do is clean your room.
Yeah.
So, like, in a sense, he's saying you got to get yourself kind of
in order,
and then you help the people around you. And then that kind of grows to your community, and then maybe at that point you can start talking about the world. But everybody seems to want to jump to that big one first. You hear it in every graduation speech. We're going to be the ones to change the world and all that. But
our family friend that went to Braught made a joke that there's all these college kids that come in saying they want to change the world, and this has been the case for like the last 40 years. Why isn't the world saved yet? Like, they're like,
and he's right. It's not going to be.
Which is really funny, I think, because they do have that like, oh, let's go and save the world. And it's like, well, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, it's like we're not doing the achievable things because we're so interested in doing the unachievable things.
Yeah, even if the unachievable are actually achievable.
Yes.
It's like, well,
that's achievable on a much longer time frame than what you have. So.
And I think one of the things that's really interesting, especially in law school, studying con law, I found fascinating. And you kind of talk about it in those Talib books is like top down versus building bottom up, especially governments. So America's was at least historically very much a bottom up society where it's like, okay, you should be most active in your town, then maybe your county, then state, then maybe region, then federal government. That sort of thing. And that's, I don't know, I very much think that's a very, that's like how I think people are supposed to. It's how at least I think about it, and I think
I agree with that.
That's how a lot of people I think should start thinking about it. But you meet a lot of people. I mean, there was a kid who I lived with when I worked in D.C. for Senator Langford, and
you worked for Langford
for a summer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
I'll keep going. I want to ask you about that later.
Yeah. So he like was focused on like, America as a country and thought the government was the most powerful thing in the world. And I countered him. I was like, well, don't you think the people would be a bit stronger? It was a whole conversation. He basically walked in drunk, said we hadn't talked before. And I was like, okay, what do you want to talk about to get to know each other? And then he listed like the most polarizing political questions.
This was the senator?
No, this was just a kid I lived with.
Okay. I lost that.
Yeah, sorry, a kid I lived with. He basically was like, let's talk about the most politically polarizing things in the country right now, as like try to get to know each other better. And then at that point in time, I didn't really have an opinion. Mostly, I was still trying to figuring it out and everything. So I just played devil's advocate, and he got super angry. And I'm just like, okay. So.
Well, that's not fun.
No.
But Langford, how'd you get involved in that? What was that like?
I honestly don't know how it happened, but I applied to work for him and Tom Cole. I got offered by both. Okay. So, I've met Tom Cole a number of times.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I mean, he's like top 4 Republican in the House. It's really funny when you talk term limits, because like a lot of people are like, oh, like I probably support term limits for federal. I do
support term limits.
Yeah, but after Tom Cole leaves, right? Because we want him to bring the money into Oklahoma.
Because my congressman is always.
Yeah, because my congressman is the leader and of appropriations right now and can bring money into Oklahoma, bring the pork here. That sort of thing. So I worked for Langford in the summer of 2019. And basically what you do is you answer phones and you give Capitol tours to constituents who visit. And you just help like with office maintenance stuff.
So it's pretty clerical.
Yeah, pretty clerical. And you do watch some of like the committee meetings and take notes, but they do them themselves. So it's really for your own benefit, I think. I did this for a year? I did this for a summer. I have a bad taste in my mouth from it.
Okay.
From one instance. For one thing that happened. So there was this person from so I don't know if this is the same for all of the senators, but at least for Senator Langford, and I would assume it's the same for all of them, we only write into the system that he sees people from Oklahoma's complaints or compliments or whatever, their comments. Okay. So you have to be one of his constituents, which would make sense. He was voted in by Oklahomans. He should probably see what Oklahomans are thinking.
Right.
Makes a lot of sense. You get all these offices get a lot of calls from people who are not from Oklahoma.
Special interest groups? Is that what you're getting at?
No. The special interests come and meet with it. Like the lobbyists do come and meet with him. Like the Google CEO at one point came and talked to him about that data center in Tulsa. But it's like, I mean, the left-leaning politicians will get calls from crazy right-leaning people, and then Langford, who's right-leaning, will get calls from crazy left-leaning people who'll be like, impeach Trump. That's what they would call it, and be like, they just yell impeach Trump and then hang up.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, okay. So you get a lot of crazies. But there was this guy who was like very like stone-voiced and very fast.
What summer was this?
2019.
2019, okay.
So the big political thing that happened was like the children in the cages photos.
Yes.
That was the big thing. I didn't answer a call at one point or I messed up a call because I didn't have the talking points.
So do they just give you like a script to go off of stuff, or you actually
for that?
have
Yes.
to be? Okay.
Because that was like a thing that happened in the news. But they gave us like an idea. Like we basically studied to like have Langford's positions and like able to answer them for people.
So you're not really talking for yourself. You're just
we're talking on behalf of the senator's office. So for him, so we're on behalf of him. So we have to have his views and know them. And so we had like a list of what his views were and some talking points, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But there was this guy from like I think it was Texas, and he like got me really I even got complimented by like our admin lady who's in charge of us. I was pretty good on the phones and talking to people. This guy got me flustered because he was like stone-faced, talking really quick, asking a lot of these questions, and I got flustered enough. I was like, call your own senator. Like that makes
it's not going to do any good.
Yeah, it's not any good talking. And then I got chastised for it.
Really?
Like, it was an email sent to all the interns, but I got chastised for it. And so that left a, like...
So what do you mean? Like, he just was going too fast?
Yeah, he was going too fast. I couldn't necessarily answer. And he was...
What kind of things was he saying?
I don't even remember, like, what he was talking about. But I think it was a number of different topics. And at one point he says, I can't call my U.S. senator. I'm like, he's not your senator. Like, yeah, he's a senator of the United States, but he's not yours. Like, immensely, right? And so I get chastised by our admin because we're not allowed to say, oh, call your own senator. We're supposed to say, oh, okay, I'll let the senator know your opinion or I'll pass that along, and then just not write it down.
Well, that doesn't make sense. So you're just not being helpful.
I mean, that's the political game, right? And, like, that was my first, like, entry into, like, the game of politics, and I did not like it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, just, like,
that's such a little thing, too.
And yeah, it's a very little thing, but I would rather, like, if I was an elected official and I had someone from out of state call me, I'd say, like, tough luck. You're not someone who votes for me. I don't care about your opinion. I care about the people who I actually, like, represent.
Yeah, you have a job.
Yeah. So, like, I have a job, and, like, Tom Cole's job is for, like, Southwest Oklahoma. Yeah. Central and Southwest Oklahoma. Like, if Tulsa people were, like, he wants to affect all Oklahoma, and he can in his position as a appropriations chair. But, like, he would rather have those come to the Southwest.
Yeah, you got to have some priorities there.
Yeah, so, I didn't like that. The Capitol tours were the best part, though.
I bet that'd be fun.
Yeah, and we got to, like, run around inside, and, like, it's a maze, and the big thing is to touch the shoe of Will Rogers' statue. Oh. So each state gets 2 statues to send to the Capitol. Mm-hmm. Ours are Will Rogers and Tecumseh, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, or Sequoia.
Probably Sequoia.
Yeah, it was one of those. But it's good luck to rub Will Rogers' shoe. Oh. But you're not supposed to touch him, and he's back behind where you're not supposed to enter. Oh. So, like, I would sneak people in, like, technically.
There's a big, like, spot on his shoe where people are touching him all the time.
Yeah, it's gold instead of bronze or something like that. It's shinier. So it's pretty funny. But yeah, that was...
But you hated that part of it.
What?
This call.
Yeah, that call just... that call really just, like, opened my eyes to kind of the game, like, the actual game.
So were you interested at all in a political career before this?
Not necessarily. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I've always had a value that I hadn't necessarily known of. I want to help my community. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely an easy way to do it, is to be like, okay, like, I can do political office and that sort of thing. So I at least wanted to try it out. And so I did. And I was like, okay, I don't want to go into politics at all. No. So, and I mean, it's really interesting.
It's just so nasty. Yeah. It's like anybody who actually wants to do some good is going to be resisted at every turn.
Do you want to learn some fun statistics that I've been researching for my next article about Oklahoma in particular?
Oh, is this the one we talked about last week a little bit?
Maybe last week a little bit. Okay, but so go ahead and I've been on the St. Louis Fed's database. It's called FRED. They have a lot of data from census, from the Labor Bureau. Mm-hmm. Like, they get all this data and they compile it basically into one place. So I've been looking at Oklahoma in particular because they have some. And our real household income, so that accounts for inflation, has gone up since 2011, and there's a reason I picked 2011, and I think the data stops at like 2023 right now, or maybe Q3 2024, has gone up 5% in, 12 years?
Wow. And this is adjusting for inflation still? Okay.
Our GDP per capita...
Why did you pick 2011 to start?
Well... Fun fact.
Or you get into that.
I was going to get to that.
Okay, I'll let you do that. I'll let you do that.
Yeah, so the statistics. So GDP, they don't have per capita for Oklahoma. They have per resident. Mm-hmm. But so I did GDP per resident versus U.S. GDP per capita. Mm-hmm. So from 2011 to 2015, roughly, like, we were outpacing them, but then we had an oil crash.
Yeah.
And then it basically was flat.
That was a tough time.
Yeah, 2015 till basically now. Mm-hmm. Like, we're going up, but we were higher than the United States. Then we basically, like, right before COVID, I think the United States outpaced us. Then we were about the same since 2011. 11, yeah. And then the United States has definitely outpaced us. And part of that is definitely, like, the tech industry. We don't have much here. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, the reason I picked 2011 is we've had a supermajority Republicans in the House and Senate, except for one legislation session, but the Republicans still had the majority since 2011 with a Republican executive. And since 2011, they're supposed to be, policy-wise, they're supposed to be very pro-business. Our household income has only increased 5% in real terms.
Wow.
And so it's just, and you think I actually compared it to California, and there's definitely different economies of scale,
right?
Because California is so much bigger. They have the tech industry, even though they have their own.
We have 4 million people.
Yeah, and they have like 30, but they have a supermajority, so I thought it'd be interesting. So their economies of scale are a lot bigger, so they can arguably grow more, but their real household income has grown 22%.
Wow.
And a lot of that is the tech industry, right? I mean, it basically got built up from 2011 till now, right? So it's like it basically was built in the last decade.
They've had a lot more things.
Yeah, whereas Oklahoma,
it's been pretty one-dimensional.
Oil is like 8 to 15% of the economy, so it's really hard to oil industry has just been kind of flat. There hasn't been since the shale boom, which was that 2011, 2015. There really hasn't been much else that's happened with that. So, but I mean, you think about that and you think about it in terms of like policy and stuff, and I'm just like, okay, is this because of our policies? So like the Republican Party needs to, because like the supermajority probably isn't going away.
Not at least for a little while.
Not for a little while. And I actually read an article where a lot of the power within our legislature is basically within the hands of like 3 people.
I believe that.
And they've been the same for the last 6 years. So I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, we've had not really good wage growth at all for household income. Our GDP growth is average. This all started because I wanted to look into like education rankings. So I want to.
We've slid in that.
Yeah, we've slid in that, and it all depends on the databases because there's definitely going to be biases and stuff like that within the data because of what they look at.
Especially in education, my goodness, there's a lot of that.
Yeah. So, but I mean, literacy rates would probably be a good way to look at that. But I mean,
have you already like developed your results of this, or you're just?
I'm just now. I'm looking at it still. I haven't.
Do you have like a hypothesis?
Well, I mean, I'm just really wondering. My question really is whether this is policy or whether this is cronyism. Like, is it because the Republican Party in Oklahoma is just like they're doing bad policy, or is it because cronyism, where like the elected officials aren't necessarily doing what actually could be helping, that sort of thing? And at least for income wise, like higher education is one of the largest things that bring people into like for socioeconomic mobility. But I mean, we have a huge thing within Oklahoma within secondary education and higher education where it just seems like they're underfunded. Are they underfunded because of our policies that they're implementing because they don't want to spend money on education, or is it because we don't bring in much revenue because
it's sort of a chicken and egg.
Is it because of policies? Is it because our tax structure, like, it's wanting to go to no income tax? We'll all love that, but like, is that going to mean like, like 10, was it like 10 years ago or something? We had like 3 emergency certifications for teachers, and now like this last year we had like 3,000. And we were talking in the elevator at one point about Ryan Walters, and it's like, it seems like he's just wanting to get politically ahead, and like fight culture wars.
Yeah, he's not a very well-liked.
Yeah, and so guy. And there's all of that, and so I mean, it all really depends on if you think education is actually something that will bring people into higher, like bring more basically production to Oklahoma, is if you have a more educated populace. And a lot of people will probably say, oh yeah, there's definitely a high correlation between that. Whether that's within our like school system or not, I think is...
Well, part of the problem with Oklahoma, and I've wrestled this myself, personally even, is it's like we have a bit of a brain drain going on, where it's like our really good students, like take engineering for example. This happens all the time. Our best and smartest people do really well in our schools. They're supported by the state with a lot of scholarships and things like that. And then it comes time to get a job, and you have to move to Houston or something like that. So Oklahoma isn't reaping the benefit of what they've spent years trying to develop. And so like the solution to that is, okay, we need some more industry, something like that. So that's even a little more nuanced than policy. It's just a question of opportunity. Too.
And so like, how do you bring those opportunities here? Right? Like, do you have to court a big business? Do you need someone that, like, Paycom's been great over the last like 20 years since it started. It's one of the big successes, new successes out of Oklahoma. I know a lot of people working there, but like with all the engineers, I mean, that happened in my hometown actually. What you just said, Halliburton started in my hometown.
Yeah.
And I remember, so in like the 70s, they moved the executives to Dallas, or 80s. And then when I was growing up, they moved all the scientists down to Houston. And so
Bartlesville is another great example of that. Yeah, I lived up there for a little bit. That town's nothing like it was when Phillips was over there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had all these high-income people in my hometown who just vanished basically within a year. And then after that, it's kind of like, oh.
It's just never the same.
Yeah, it's just not the same. And I actually had I was in a meeting with Gene Rainbolt before he passed away.
You met Gene Rainbolt?
Mm-hmm.
Really? How long ago was this?
Summer of 21.
Wow. Decently long time ago.
Yeah. So we had a whole conversation about how the small towns were dying. Like in the next 30, 40 years, as the older population passes away, that the population in these towns are going to half.
Yeah.
And that's Bank First's market. So what he started,
right?
Right?
What are they going to do?
So, well, they've moved into Dallas.
Yeah.
With Pegasus and I forgot.
See, there you go.
It's
just condensing everything.
Yeah. So I don't know if that means there's opportunities in these small towns, right?
Well, it's sad you drive through a lot of those towns now. Like I was just in Hennessy this weekend for a basketball tournament, and you go over there and it's like, how can you live here? Like, not insulting anybody, but it's like there aren't any jobs. There's nothing to do. There's not
all the farmland. That's kind of it.
Yeah, like you can't stay here.
Yeah, I always wonder how these small schools still have kids. So
yeah, it's just wild. You know, like what do you do about that?
So,
and in the case of like Halliburton, Phillips, and all that, it's like, well, I know a lot of that industry has moved down to the coast, 'cause, you know, easier to transport stuff. It's like there's some of that you really can't solve, because it's like unless you're going to build a canal all the way to, you know, you're not going to get that advantage here. So we're kind of limited geographically.
Yeah, I mean we do have a port.
Like technically, yes, we do.
A river port, yeah, in Tulsa.
Isn't there a Navy base out there?
A Coast Guard base.
Yeah.
We have like a river guard base or something like that. We used to have a naval air station here. But yeah, I mean, it seems like military is one of our largest things. Healthcare is one of our largest employers. But
that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and how do we fix it unless like the younger generation are basically creating new businesses? Because these older ones are going to where like Halliburton. It makes sense to Halliburton if you move to Houston because they need to have the connections with those big oil companies to service their new wells. So it's like, yeah, they don't want to fly into Duncan. Apparently, my mom once told me about Duncan is when Halliburton was in its heyday, there was people from all over the world flying in. Yeah. That Duncan has a different accent compared to the surrounding Oklahoma areas because we had so many scientists from just kind of all over and different people from all over the world coming through. But
then when you get to talking about policy, it's like what you just said there. It's to their business advantage to be there where their customers are.
Yeah.
And people they have relationships with. It's like, okay,
yeah.
Unless you have just huge mass exodus back here, you know, you can't develop that overnight with any policy.
Yeah, and I mean, and that goes into the whole, like, what do you think government is supposed to do, right? And so if for the most part your laissez-faire with it being for business, then it's like, okay, well then it's up to like the actual citizens of Oklahoma to actually make it better. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, what are we doing about that?
Yeah, exactly. What are we? And at least a lot of what I've seen with Gen Z is, you know, what isn't there a statistic now where the number one thing high schoolers wanted to be for like the younger Gen Zs was an influencer?
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do that anywhere. So,
I mean, you
could.
You know, maybe, you could be an influencer at your job, I guess.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So
you can live in Hennessy and be an influencer.
Yeah. I mean, part of the thing with young people, I mean, there was a big thing with OU, with like what you said with the Houston thing, is that in the last like 5-10 years, they were getting a lot more of the grads to come and stay here in Oklahoma City, particularly because of the developments in the West Village, Midtown, Deep Deuce, and Bricktown. But there really hasn't been much development since then.
No, and I studied chemical engineering here.
Yeah.
I remember freshman year, this was something that was kind of drilled into us. So the school has a really rich history in like oil and gas and catalysis and that, as you would kind of expect.
Yeah.
But lately they're kind of shifting to more of like a biomanufacturing emphasis type thing, like pharmaceutics or a lot of renewables and kind of biofuels, that sort of thing. So I remember early on, freshman, sophomore year and all that, that was something I was told by just about every professor, every deans, I've talked to deans, that's kind of coming here. Biomanufacturing and pharmaceutics Oklahoma City is the next big thing for that. It's just a matter of 2 or 3 years, and this is going to be really hot. And that just hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know we've got like Cytovance here and all that. There's, I think, a few other firms, Wheeler Bio, ARL, stuff like that. But it just isn't a big deal yet. Mm-hmm. And, why is that?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, across the street from the Bolt here, there's the Innovation District, mm-hmm. which is I think it's a combination of, like, government and Oklahoma City, like, mm-hmm. in Oklahoma Health Science Center, like, mm-hmm. together doing something. But it's supposed to basically be a biotech startup, like, housing place. Mm-hmm. And I think there's, like, 1 or 2 companies in there. And, mm-hmm. I mean, we're working for OK BioStart and a consulting class.
Yeah, doing some consulting for them. Yeah.
And, I mean,
are you in one of those groups?
I'm one of those groups, yeah. And, I mean, they're not, like, partnered with the schools at all, really. It's, like, it's very much its own thing, mm-hmm. which I find very interesting.
It's like these things aren't available to just students. They're looking for something to grab onto and want to stay around here.
Yeah.
And, like, there are plenty of people who want to stay here. I'm one of them. Mm-hmm. I'm really serious about wanting to stay here. Mm-hmm. And it's just hard to do.
Yeah.
It's like, where do you look?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that probably all of us need to do is really, like, look at our, like, the communities that we're in and want to be in, mm-hmm. and find out how we could necessarily make it better.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, that's one of the things I really think about is, well, and this has come about from a lot of self-reflection, is, mm-hmm. well, I really think people need bread to live on, mm-hmm. and, like, bread in a spiritual sense. Like, yeah, purpose, fruit of the Spirit, mm-hmm. however you want to call it.
Yeah.
But they need, like, meaning. Mm-hmm. And a lot of, like, older generation. What? Yeah, man shall not live on bread alone. And a lot of people in the older generations, like the greatest generation, that sort of thing, they got it from work. Mm-hmm. A lot of, especially the men did, mm-hmm. Because they were the ones mostly working, right? But a lot of people get it from work, and you need all the other stuff too. Mm-hmm. But you get a lot of from work because you can see the impact you're having, mm-hmm. that sort of thing, and that's one of the reasons I want to, like, I really just want to create jobs, mm-hmm. and I think the best way to probably do that is in the private sector.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so at least that's what, at least I want to try to do, right, mm-hmm. is I want to try to create jobs because, well, for one, it'll help the people that I'm both the clients or who I'm supplying, plus the workers, and then hopefully that can help build up at least something to help mm-hmm. the community as well.
I had the very same thought,
mm-hmm.
actually. What was I going to say? I just went blank. Entrepreneurship, making jobs. Where was I going with that?
Well, you had the same thought about, like, you feel like a calling to make jobs to help your community.
Okay, yeah, I remember what I was going to say. So at that point, it's less about your career, mm-hmm. as it is a moral responsibility, mm-hmm. in a way. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying?
And I would say that's a very American ethos.
Yes, it is.
Very American. Mm-hmm. Is that, okay, it's not, really anyone's job or even, like, to like, create these. Mm-hmm. It's like you're basically shouldering, like, burden, like, taking on the responsibility basically for other people's livelihoods, mm-hmm. by creating these jobs. And it's a huge responsibility, and I would say that's very American, mm-hmm. because I mean that's basically what a lot of our, like, if you were to look going full circle, I guess, and going back to, like, who we venerate here in America, like, we venerate, like, these people who have, like, created these, like, Bezos, mm-hmm. Musk. Like, people definitely have strong opinions, bad or good for them, but there's a reason why they're, like, in our pop culture, mm-hmm. is because
there's something we really like about them.
Yeah, we really like something about, even though they could have been Nepo kids. Mm-hmm. Like,
there's always some of that.
Yeah, there's always some of that, but we like that they're like taking on this burden basically and creating these things. And I would say, and I watch, like, going back to, like, Jordan Peterson, I watched his Gospels seminar. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I haven't
yet.
Watched that.
There's one thing he talks about in terms of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
You go kind of like the Nepo thing, and he says, well, the way that you get rid of the privilege problem is with the parable of the talents. Mm-hmm. So like the servant was given 5, the servant was given 2, the servant was given 1. Mm-hmm. The one with 5 gave 5 more, 2 more, 1 didn't do anything and just gave that 1 back. And it might seem like unfair, but it basically what like the way that he articulates a way to like analyze it is, well, if you're with the gifts that you've been given, mm-hmm. you almost have a moral responsibility to make sure to like double, like to use those fruits to like enhance whatever, mm-hmm. to enhance your community, mm-hmm. To make things better, I think is a general way to say it. And it's proportional. So if you're, the son of a billionaire, and
if you've been given something,
there's
an expectation.
Yeah, there's an expectation. You have to bear the responsibility. Like, sorry that this is a lot of responsibility, but you've been also given a lot.
It has its advantages.
And those like billionaires, they can do a lot of these like crazy things because of that. But you also have to take that responsibility, mm-hmm. And it's proportional. So like if you were, lower middle class in a small town in Oklahoma, then, and you were, maybe your responsibility is to be the first person to be educated, mm-hmm. and to bear that responsibility for your family. Like, it doesn't have to be, you have to become the next Elon Musk or Bezos, mm-hmm. or John D. Rockefeller, whoever. Yeah. It's like, it can be like one step. Mm-hmm. Like, if you have one talent and say it's accounting, maybe it's to become like,
go be the best accountant.
Yeah, in your hometown, uh-huh. right? Like, it doesn't have to be you have to create the next KPMG, sort of thing, or mm-hmm. even become a partner there. You could even work for them, but you don't necessarily have to be a partner. Mm-hmm. But it's like, it's incremental, and I mean, and a lot of people, maybe it's part of like the hyper individualization that we're kind of experiencing mm-hmm. with our generation, but I think a lot of people in the past thought in terms of generations, and a lot now we think more in case of like the individual.
Yes.
Like, I need to be famous and rich, mm-hmm. and live this kind of life, and not necessarily my grandkids. I want to make sure they like have the opportunities to be able to like have a good life. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's just because our generation isn't necessarily at that parenting age yet.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, the millennials were that way.
A little
broadly
bit,
speaking.
Yeah. Broadly speaking.
The boomers were that way, broadly speaking.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Very individual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, this isn't a new thing.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd see a lot of what we're experiencing as Gen Z is the result of a lot of that.
Yeah. And maybe that's just like we're seeing it a lot more now, but that probably has been true for all of history, and there's a reason. Like,
yeah, we just don't have.
You hate to say it, right? But like, there's a reason for like the Pareto distribution of like the 1% having 80% of the wealth or whatever. Like, there's a reason for it, and it's because they did these, took these.
Yeah, they were the most productive.
Yeah, most productive. They did,
generally speaking.
They did. Yeah. They took whatever sacrifices with. I mean, there's a reason why the top 10 richest men in the world are all divorced. They were married to their jobs. Like, they sacrificed their family life to basically build these businesses. And so there's like a reason they're there. And a lot to getting to that point is probably luck too. But like. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's some sort of statistic where like 80% of Americans will be in like the top 10% of income earners in their life for at least 1 year. Something
really?
Like that.
That's huge.
Yeah. Like, that's the whole thing with
like the top 1% of the world or of the
United States.
Oh.
Well, that's
like 400,000.
Yeah. We're all in the top 1% of the world.
Yes.
Basically. But that's one of the things, like, you'll read it, I think you'll read it in Anti-Fragile, mm-hmm. If not in Skin in the Game.
Can you say what that word means, by the way?
Anti-fragile? So there's not a word for the opposite of fragile. Mm-hmm. You can think robust, but robust basically says it stays the same against external stimulus. Whereas there's nothing that when external stimulus comes, it gets stronger. So anti-fragile, like, basically lifting weights is an anti-fragile endeavor because basically the idea is your muscles strain and basically have this external influence that's like could damage you if up to an extent it would damage it, like and you couldn't repair it.
Yeah.
But if you basically stress it to an extent, it'll actually get stronger. Mm-hmm. So basically the idea is, to an extent, a lot of things the stressors that come at them actually make them stronger until it doesn't, right? Yeah. So like a porcelain cup dropped from an inch is robust. It won't break, but a porcelain cup dropped from 10 feet will break. Mm-hmm. And so another example with that is like the adaptability of humans. Like humans are really anti-fragile, both from, okay, we can actually think and try to find tools to help us like get through an obstacle, but also from a gene perspective, like biology wise, like our genes, we go with another person and basically sacrifice half of our gene code because it gets rid of parasites for one, but like that helps us be able to genetically adapt to the environments that we're in quicker. And so that's the idea of anti-fragile. But one of the things you read in like the income statistics is that it's just a snapshot of like today, right? So it's like, income inequality has gotten worse because, the 1% now own more than like the bottom 80% or whatever than they did 20 years ago. Well, that's like right now. Like, tell me, as a person on like, how many people who were like in like the bottom like percentiles of income 20 years ago or 40 years ago, where are they now, or where have they gone throughout their life?
That's a really good point.
But one of the things that you don't have whenever you do like regressions for statistics is I think it's called ethnography, something like that. What that is. So basically it's accounting for time.
Okay.
And so like the idea behind it is like if 100 people go to like a casino and statistically like you have a 1% chance of losing, one person is going to lose. Mm-hmm. However, if you're one person and you keep going to the casino and you have a 1% chance of losing, well, that increases every single time because you keep going back. Yeah. So it keeps increasing. Mm-hmm. So like, if you do, because the way you do that mathematically is with expected return. So like, say you have a 50% chance of, like you have a 50% chance of losing half of your money and a 50% chance of like,
doubling your money.
Of doubling it, and there's variations. Well, at a certain extent, like the house always wins, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and so since the odds are in their favor in a casino, like it's 51% probably that you're going to lose. Yeah. So because it's 51, just mathematically speaking, that means that your expected return for each iteration is going to be less and less until it hits zero. So you have basically, you're going to hit zero at some point. Whereas if you go with a group and go at one point, and it's that like 50, that 1% chance, well, it might not be you. It might be the person next to you. Mm-hmm. So it looks different. And so a lot of statistics are that, where they just look at everyone at that one point, and they don't necessarily look at people across time whenever they have that chance.
And that's a difficult thing to observe.
It's really hard. And there's been some studies, but there are studies on income mobility. And some of them have said that we're getting worse. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's
worse as in
we're not necessarily, as in we're not basically churning people through up and down. And part of the problem with Europe is that they have so many laws and regulations. They basically keep people stagnant.
Yeah.
Like what you want is churn at the top and having people being able to take the risk to go back to zero. In America, it's a lot easier for that to happen. But the more you regulate things and the less you bring in competition,
you start to lock things up.
Yeah, you start to lock things up. And I think that's really talked about in Skin in the Game, that second book
And that's a lot of what people complain about our capitalism right now. Because in a lot of ways, we don't have a pure capitalism.
Yeah.
Like pharmaceutics is a great example of that. It's basically impossible to fail at this point once you're, for the big companies that are out there, because they have they have their fingers in so much influence over the government and whatnot.
Yeah.
So there's some of that where it's like, okay, we're no longer competing on equal terms.
Yeah.
And you've locked it up.
Yeah, and that's what the antitrust stuff is supposed to do is to say, okay, you can't price gouge this person to knock them out because they're discovering a new drug, so to speak. I mean, there's already so many regulations within pharmaceuticals with the FDA approval process and everything that is just a whole mess. And
like, it's such a labyrinth now. Like, how is just somebody who has a new idea for some new drug is ever supposed to develop that on their own?
Yeah.
Like, you really can't do it.
No, you would probably have to sell it to one of those bigger companies for them to develop and get it through the process.
Well, even in like software, we talk about that in a lot of, what we're studying right now. It's like that's how everything's going is you have to have an exit strategy and you consolidate everything, and somebody else comes along and gobbles you up. It's like there's not that churn like you were talking about. No one new is rising up to the top.
Yeah, and exactly. And so, like,
to be clear, by the way, I am a total capitalist here. I'm not, but maybe I sounded a little.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole. That's what we want is that churn and not necessarily even companies, but like with people, right?
Yeah.
And
same idea.
Yeah, same idea. And I mean, you can think about that with like the housing market too.
Boy.
But yeah, I mean, that's part of the thing that we would need to be looking at probably is more like, okay, are we getting people from like the bottom, like, I said like
is the middle quartile going to become the upper quartile?
Yeah, like are they moving? Is it moving? How much is it really moving around? And like, what are things you can do to help incentivize people to be able to do that? And I mean, education is definitely one of them because from at least they're going to have an economic signal that says that they'll show up and do the work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big part of it.
I mean, that's one piece of the puzzle. Yeah. I think we've kind of already talked about that today, too. It's like you can be as educated as you want, but if there's not a place for you to apply that, or a way for you, maybe places.
Yeah, I mean that's that's the problem with if you want to be in Oklahoma, but
that's what
you're
we just talked about.
You're an AI engineer, like you're probably gonna have to move to San Francisco.
Yeah, like sorry.
Yeah, that's just how it goes.
So it's like if we continue to pour into education at the expense of everything else, it's like we're basically just getting robbed by other states, because they're reaping the benefits of what we've paid for.
Yeah.
And that's not fair.
One of my friends I was talking about it with, he even said, well, like, he doesn't even see the point of like publicly funded education because everyone has a computer.
No.
I would say I've heard
that.
Yeah, I've heard that. You could make that same argument like 50 years ago and say, well, there's a library in every town.
Yeah.
Like, why do you need to go to public school? You can read everything here. And I definitely think there's a need to have some sort of like teacher-student relationships. I think that's very important. But I get the point where it's like, okay, it doesn't seem like they're probably like they're teaching things that you probably need to know, but people don't understand why it's important anymore. And like what you said, I mean, like, is this actually going to like stay here? Like, what's the point of us training these people, basically, to even be good citizens? Much less like we're focusing so much more on the workforce. If they're just going to go to Texas and we're just getting like tangent benefits, basically.
Exactly.
So
like it's very asymmetrical. You use that phrase. I'll say that again.
Yeah, it can like the rewards, like we're bearing a lot of the risk, but the rewards, like Texas isn't bearing the risks of that. No. So it's like asymmetrical risk bearing, basically, because we're like, oh, we're taking the risk of training this person, but they're going to go ahead and leave. So like, how do you incentivize them to stay? Well, you need a job to be able to keep them there, and then if you have enough people who have like the money to do it here, then all the other stuff will pop up, probably, like the restaurants and everything. But, I mean, I guess...
So we need people like you to stay.
Yeah, me and my building a card game for high school reunions, drinking card game. Like, that's definitely going to bring in, like, 2 jobs.
So let's talk about that. We're running up about an hour and 40 minutes right now. So kind of getting to the end of it today. Let's talk about some of what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, you're involved in a lot of things. Let's start with that card game. You invented a card game?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on a card game. I'm on my second prototype. But basically the idea is, at least for Gen Zers and definitely and probably millennials, and I would assume Gen Alpha and Beta will probably have the same thing. There's going to be a lot of...
has a name?
Yeah. The newborns are Gen Beta. There's a whole article in the Wall Street Journal about how that's insulting because we call people betas as a derogatory term. But basically is that there's going to be a lot of anxiety for 10-year reunions at high schools, particularly like, are you married? Do you have kids? Are you successful? Like all these sorts of things. And so the idea is to basically create a drinking game out of the, with cards, to help people answer these questions in a lower anxiety environment by playing this game. So one, you might be a little bit inebriated, so you'll answer a little bit more freely. Yeah. One, it's a game you're playing as a group, so everyone has to answer. So it's not like a one-on-one conversation where it's like, am I asking this person all the questions I need to ask so that I'm caught up on this person? It's like, okay, for the most part, like 50% of the questions are group questions. So it's like, okay, you're going to get an idea at least of like what people are up to by playing this game. And if you want to follow up, you can, right? And then a lot of it is like individual questions. So that's the idea. But the idea is basically like reminisce and reconnect with those people that you grew up with. And particularly I'm focusing on high school because I think that's a big market. I mean, we have like 16,000 high schools in America. And there's a 10-year reunion every year. Yeah. So at minimum, there's 16,000 that possibly could be sold. There you go. And I think they could be even sold into smaller and smaller friend groups that you want to hang out with. So like, you know, some of the questions would be like, oh, like, what's your occupation? How do you spend your time now? Another question would be like reminiscing about high school, being like...
So they're more serious questions or just...
They can be. There's some funny... Most of the reminiscing are the funny, and most of the reconnecting are like, okay, we're actually like trying to see what you're up to. So like the reminiscing a lot more is like, what was your favorite class in high school? Or who was your secret crush? Who's someone you've completely forgotten about since high school?
Well, that's a hard one to answer.
Exactly, but like, you know, that happens a lot where it's like, I completely forgot about this person, but maybe you remembering them like a few weeks ago or maybe at the reunion or something. So that's one idea I'm working on, and I got a lot of good feedback from...
2 prototypes already?
I'm on my second that I'm working on. I was told from my last group that I need to focus, I need to make it to where they're not questions. Because especially when people are drinking, they just want to be told what to do. And then whenever you ask a question, people kind of put up defenses. Yeah. Right? So if you just say, instead of saying, who was like your crush, you say, so tell us your crush from high school. Or tell us your secret crush.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, so that was, I think, a really big suggestion. I have 100 questions written out.
Are you the only one writing these?
Yes. As of right now, I am the only one writing these. Okay. And so I have 100. I think 100 is probably pretty good. I'm hoping that I can get these both as like actual card game and probably as a freemium based app. I got one. This is way down the line, but one person told me instead of doing subscription based, to have people buy packs. Like maybe it's $1 or $2 online. Yeah. Because it's like, okay, like you can do the high school, you could do office, you could even have like specific college, like OU alumni from like 80 to 89 or something like that. Yeah. And like, okay, like that person would probably spend like $5 to buy that that specific edition. But if you have a subscription, like you're only going to use it like once a year or maybe like once a quarter if you get together.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
Yeah, it's not worth it for the subscription. But if you buy it for like $2, like it probably makes a lot more sense. And it's a lot cheaper on the app. So that's one of the things I'm working on. The other thing.
So do you have like a website for that or anything yet?
No, I'm currently still. I was
gonna say I'll put a link in the video description.
Yeah, maybe if I have them by then. So maybe I'll put it on my website and have a shop.
Yeah,
tab.
Your website will be on here.
Yeah. So have a shop tab and have the game. That would be funny. But well, I mean, once I get like a few more games, I haven't actually played a game with it yet. No. I just went through the questions with my with someone who I know who plays a lot of drinking games. So he gave me his 2 cents, which is really helpful. So I actually want to play at least 5 games before I and get through basically like 5 or 6 prototypes before I actually like try to sell it as online. I try to create an app for one, and also like try to sell the cards also.
Yeah.
So that's probably, hopefully I'll have that done by May. But I haven't really had that much good luck with focus groups.
Really?
Yeah. Like,
how do you find a focus group?
Well, the MBA cohort I've asked, and they've said they play, but the few times I've asked, they've all said no, or that they were busy. And then we were going to play at my brother's birthday party trip. But we ended up not. But he's the one who went through the questions with me, because I play quite a few games together, like Cards Against Humanity, that sort of thing. And so he gave me that suggestion for commands, which I thought was really good. So I haven't played it, and
I got a group of guys that I could play that with.
Okay.
So let me know if you ever get to the point of wanting a test like that. We might can talk about it.
Yeah, we could talk about setting something up. I've told people I'll buy the alcohol. So, I need at least a few focus groups. And it would probably be better if they were high school friends.
So that's what I got.
Yeah, so that would probably be better. And that would be helpful. So thank you. I'll let you know.
Cool.
So that's one thing I'm working on, yeah. And so hopefully it turns out, I think it's a good idea. I've gotten good feedback about the concept. Whether I can execute it or not is a whole different question. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Do you want to talk about any of the startups at all?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can talk about that.
So, I don't have an NDA. I'm an owner.
That's true, yeah.
So I'm doing a fintech startup with a bunch of friends from my undergrad at Claremont. Most people from Claremont are econ/finance bros, which is funny. But basically, we all trade stocks. I don't do options, but my friends do options. And basically, we were very discontent with the offerings that were kind of available with it.
As far as the things,
the softwares that we could use, because if you really want, like, the top of the line Bloomberg terminal, and you can't, and like, you don't get I don't know if you get as much data as some of these like specific option trading platforms get, but a Bloomberg terminal costs you like $20,000 a month, maybe more. Like, it's insane. And so, I mean, we were just chatting, and like, my friends from India, and a lot of, like, 70% of the option volume is coming from India. Like, it's kind of crazy. Wild. Like, a lot of them are as India's kind of getting a little bit more developed, right? A lot of these people are entering the stock market. So basically, the idea is that we are wanting to become kind of like an international specific version of the Bloomberg terminal.
Okay.
But the Bloomberg terminal, the Bloomberg terminal's UI is still 1980s code.
Oh.
It's awful.
Yeah.
Like, you have to.
I've never used one.
Yeah, you literally have to like take courses on how to learn it. Like, basically, like you know, like, go
like DOS.
Yeah, you have to go online and watch the video. Like, you need to watch YouTube videos. Like, it's not very intuitive on how to use. So our whole platform, basically, what we're trying to create is, what we want to do is create a way better UI that has just like as much analytic capabilities, along with like using our own analysis also. So we're also giving suggestions mainly for retail traders. Like, we're wanting it to be very low cost. And
so would this be something that's available to just somebody like me who wanted to do day trading or something like that? Like, what
once
do you mean by cost?
So, like, if you wanted to day trade, or even just have like an analytics platform to help you, you would buy ours, and we would our goal is to charge it from anywhere from like $5 to $20 a month.
Wow.
Yeah. And our big thing is we really want to focus on algo trading. So
kind of like this guy who's tracking Pelosi's.
Yeah. So like, say you had like access to that data, and you wanted to do an algorithm that like would buy or sell like within the minutes that they report their buying and selling. Like, it would be like that. Or like, if you wanted to do more statistical, say you did a straddle option strategy, which is buying a put and a call. And so like, if it's very volatile, then you win either way.
Yeah.
Say you wanted that, but like, anytime it hit, like, you did it again, basically, for like the same stock, or like, say it moves a certain way. Like,
just some automation.
Yeah, so it's basically a lot of automation in terms of the trading. So that's the big thing that we're wanting to like roll out, is basically we want to be able to let retail traders be able to do hedge fund level quant trading. I have a friend who's a quant at a hedge fund, and he's doing a commodities algorithm right now that's working pretty well. But that's like the idea. And so we're going to have we're trying good UI, have access basically to all of the like high level financial analysis that these top firms have that retail traders doesn't even know exists. Like I doubt many people who are retail traders, unless they go like a really deep into like the academics, know about the Black-Scholes model, which is the financial model on how to price options. And also they have the equation on modern portfolio theory, which is how to optimize your portfolio. So we're basically going to basically try to create a software that does that for them based off their portfolio, and then we're going to use partner with brokers to basically where we're not the broker. There's so much regulation in that. Yeah. We're just an analysis and maybe an advisor, like saying, hey, so if you want to do a strategy, and we're just like, okay, like. It doesn't make sense for this stock. The volatility is low.
So there's like some AI involved with that?
We will be using AI to help with the processes. And much to the chagrin of our head developer, who is a developer at Microsoft, our CEO wants a chatbot. He's just like, that's so stupid.
Everybody wants a chatbot.
Yeah, everyone wants a chatbot. Yeah. But like actually using AI to basically process the analysis. And
I feel like AI is becoming the new like MBA buzzword.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is, and you're gonna see definitely like a shakeup of AI. You saw that with DeepSeek coming out, that sort of thing. It is going to revolutionize. It's going to be like the .com bubble, right? Probably where it's like, okay, there's going to be all of these companies that definitely go bust because of AI, or you don't really know how to implement it or how to use a website. And so there's definitely going to be some failures, but the ones who win will definitely be like very well off, probably because of that. And hopefully that's us. I know Bloomberg has their own AI, but their UI is just very outdated. So we want it to be more intuitive, and we're going to market it more to retail investors initially. And we're starting in India, because
starting in India.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The CEO's Indian.
Okay.
So we have that connection.
So what are you in this?
I'm
like a technology officer or something like that?
So we have a head developer, and we have a PhD candidate economics from UCLA. All from Claremont. So we have like our head tech, we have our head like algo guy, we have our CEO who's a big finance guy, and then I'm basically all the back room for the most part. Like I probably would akin to me to being like chief finance officer. So like I'm in charge of I'm co-chief of marketing with the CEO. I'm also in charge of budgeting, modeling out all of our stuff. That CFOs do, that sort of thing. And then I'll also be one of the leads for fundraising. So I will probably be going on some sort of podcast tour in the next year.
Well, I'm ahead of the game.
Yeah, you're ahead of the game. We can put this on our website at some point. But yeah, so
that's really interesting.
Yeah, so like that's what we're trying to do, and part of that, and like if you want to like a broad like snippet of it, is that we're trying to democratize finance, because like with law, it's very hierarchical. A lot of these top investment firms,
law is a club,
and finance is very much a club too. These top firms hire from their target universities, and it's really hard to get in if you're not in the target university. And you have to have like a, whatever GPA and all that sort of stuff. When in reality, like anyone can be an investor. And it's really like your own risk tolerance. And we really want to just basically give these very high level financial equations that we understand and basically help retail investors. Yeah, I understand them a little bit. And just basically help these retail investors and like individuals and maybe even small shops have access to them at an affordable price. So we're starting in India, and then hopefully within a year we'll break off into Japan and Australia. We're hesitant to go to Hong Kong because of China. even though that those are so we have a map that has like $1 trillion market caps for like how much the actual stock market is worth. So it's like India has 2, Hong Kong, Australia, Japan. I know Bangkok has a stock market.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll go there, but we'll try. But we're probably going to look at like Asia, Eastern Hemisphere first.
So you're not even introducing the New York Stock Exchange?
Not initially. We're going to have a good customer base prior to doing that. Our goal is to really become like the analysis tool like Bloomberg for a national. And I mean, Bloomberg's in these international markets.
Some clout.
Yeah, like we want to basically have these clouts, and so that's kind of the idea. Start in these international markets, really see like what we can do, and then probably in 3 to 5 years we'll try to come to the U.S. And start directly competing head on head in New York. And
that's pretty big.
Yeah, so that's the dream at least. So is to democratize it and really try to let everyone have access to it. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, that's the big startup that we're trying to do. We just got our LLC and bank accounts approved like a week or 2 ago.
Oh, okay.
So
still pretty early.
Yeah, we are getting contracts with vendors to help us start it, and we're finalizing those in the next week.
Gotcha. Well, that's incredibly interesting.
Yeah. So, so I'll, like we're already looking toward VC fund. We got our initial startup costs to get our MVP plus like 3 months.
Mm-hmm. As in you already have received.
We basically have our CEO has gotten the money for that. So that's where we're. So like we're fine at least for until 3 months after we start, because we have a whole, and we're not taking any salaries. Mm-hmm. So at least as of right now, we're fine. But once this starts to like, hopefully it scales up and is pretty successful, we'll actually have to be like, okay, like what can we
go in on this?
Yeah, we got like how much do we pay? So we're really
skin in the game.
Yeah, well we have skin in the game. We own it.
You do.
Yeah, so if it fails, we lose what we're putting in. And so that's the idea. Hopefully it works. We're already in conversations with some VCs. These are initial like foot in the door.
Those are long conversations.
Yeah. So like we're not going to start actually trying to raise money until after we have a product. Mm-hmm. I know because a lot of people. It's really interesting, like the different financial, like how people come to like financial decisions compared to like Oklahoma and California. Oklahoma's a lot more conservative. It's like so like for us, like with a startup, it's more like, at least from the people I talk to, it's like, okay, we want to see an actual product. Like, we're not wanting to write off like prototypes, that sort of thing. Like we're, like real we're trying to invest in something that's actually tangible almost. And then, California a lot more is like, oh, you have maybe the inkling of an idea. Like, okay, here's like money.
And maybe that's part of why Oklahoma's falling behind.
Maybe, and like, maybe it's just because we're in that entrepreneurship class here at the MBA. It seems like we have a lot of, it seems like, like this entrepreneurship culture in Oklahoma seems huge, but also
it's not the same.
Yeah, it's not like, I only went to like one public entrepreneurship event last semester, and it didn't really seem like, it's not as big as I would think you might let it on to be, which is something that could really help Oklahoma is if we really push that. I don't necessarily, I would hope that the entrepreneurship majors are like starting businesses and not just going and getting jobs, but they have to do what they're.
There's so many of them. That's like the biggest certificate here.
Yeah. But you won't know if anything works until you actually put it in the market. Mm-hmm. That's part of it, and you also have to pay for your life. Mm-hmm. Like that's the big thing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I don't. A lot of these people, it's like, you can be in entrepreneurship on the side. Like you can go.
Yeah, and as much as we talk about how much more difficult a lot of things are today than they used to be, entrepreneurship is not one of them. Mm-mm. That's a whole lot easier now than it used to be.
Yeah, we got our LLC and bank account set up online. Through Stripe Atlas and Mercury within 2 weeks. Mm-hmm.
And everyone has so much access to information now that you can pretty well teach yourself how to do that.
Yeah. So I have my opinions about the MBA in general. I know you, but
I do too.
So.
Well, cool. Do you have anything else you want to plug for? Here in the last minute or two that we got.
I don't know. You can if you're interested in hearing more from me. I don't post anything ever. Yeah. But if you want to connect, I'm on LinkedIn. Grant Braught. I have a website, Xander & Co. .com. It's on my LinkedIn. I had my article about the liberal arts thing that we talked about there. I want to publish a few more articles here and there, maybe once a month. I don't really have a plan for that.
Just whenever you feel like it.
I'm currently trying to be. I submitted poetry to the Oklahoma and Oklahoma State literary journals.
Oh, really?
I'm still waiting to hear back.
Yeah, how long ago was that?
September.
Oh, wow.
They said it would take a year to get to it. Yeah, it kept on getting pushed back, too. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, maybe I'll be published. Maybe I won't. Who knows?
So poet, entrepreneur.
Maybe.
Politician.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Grant Braught, everybody.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll have to do this again. We have good conversation.
Yeah, I'm open to talk about anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank all of you for sticking around this long. We'll catch you some other time. So, goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Yeah.